Hey everybody, Bandicoot Commando here, and welcome back to Marvel Rivals. Last time, I read Star-Lord's lore story, Quantum Slingshot. It covered his perspective of being on Clintar, and after some time there and fighting off symbiotes, Quill came up with an idea to help them get the Milano off. It would involve having to briefly be in the negative zone in order to switch places with the Milano and the celestial head that is floating in the orbit of Clintar. But during their brief time in there, Quill was seeing the Milano was giving off multiple alert sounds, and at the same time, Quill was able to see something going on the body that he made the switch too early and that it put them back on Clintar. But what Quill had witnessed was Null and Adam Warlock, because Adam was starting to break out of his cocoon. But who knows? How them boys gonna get out of this is the question. Who knows? But we'll see in the next one. Well, I don't know. So today, we are gonna read Storm's lore story. We're almost there with the lores, people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, technically 7, because Wolverine's got 2 of them. We're almost there. Storm, Aurora Monroe. An Omega-level mutant ability to manipulate weather makes Aurora Monroe a force to be reckoned with. Rain or shine, thunder or lightning, nature itself bends to the command of the goddess of the storm. Omega-level mutant just basically means how powerful that mutant is, and Omega is the strongest rank that they can have. Storm and Magneto are examples of this. I only have one skin of hers. Ivory Breeze. It is my responsibility as Gold Leader to welcome you to the X-Men. So, yeah, this costume is kind of based more on what she wore in the animated series, the 90s X-Men series. I did see some of it, but I didn't really watch that much of it. And I never got to see in its sequel series, X-Men 97. I can't wait to get this skin in particular. Born a mutant and worshipped as a goddess due to her ability to manipulate the weather, Aurora Monroe became the X-Man known as Storm. As the regent of Sol and the protector of Krakoa, she now serves as a protector for mutants on Earth and beyond. The energy generated by the time stream entanglement has resulted in a violent temporal tempest on the sentient island Krakoa, the nation that the X-Men call home. Although her powers are capable of stabilizing the island's climate, Storm seeks a more permanent solution alongside her fellow heroes. Dreamy Dew. Oh, so that's what that does. Okay. Very few mutants had the honor of serving on both the Quiet Council of Krakoa and the Great Ring of Akaro simultaneously. Akaro is basically Krakoa's sister nation, I guess you can call it. But instead of being stationed on Earth, it's in Mars. Or at least it was called Mars. Now it is known as Akaro. Aurora Monroe was one, and she had long looked forward to the day when the two sentient islands might be reunited. She had not, however, counted on it happening quite like this. It had begun without her even knowing. While she was walking along the coral shoals that, together with a great oceanic lagoon, separated Akaro from the great red desert of Mars, The tiny whirls and eddies in time grew almost instantly into a giant wave of disruption. Ordinary, Ordinarily, Storm was hypersensitive to tiny changes in the atmosphere around her due to the nature of her mutant powers, but she had been preoccupied with the next challenge on her seat on the Great Ring and let that preoccupation distract her from her immediate sensory environment. Now aware that something was happening before she understood what, her pulse quickened, then slowed again to a thud. Raindrops slowed, hung still in the air, then hurtled again toward the ground, each one at a different speed. Clouds tore across the sky, cleared, then rebuilt themselves into great black walls, all in seconds. Behind them, the sky inverting its normal uniform brilliant blue. Streaks of indigo and black split from the horizon to horizon, revealing stars that were not the stars Storm knew. She raised a hand and saw raindrops falling on her skin, and others passing straight through her hand as if they weren't there. All around her, plants grew, bloomed, and died, all in an instant. Trees split the skies, growing 200 feet high and toppling, becoming soil again before their falling trunks even hit the ground. The air was thick with flowers and insects moving through a million generations before her eyes as she drew a single breath. Akaro and Krakoa both appeared before her, partly as if they were superimposed on each other. Then Aurora realized she was seeing it wrong. The two islands were colliding, molding into one another as the overlapping timelines tore away all boundaries of sense. The Red Keep and the Tower of Broken Will overlapped, merged, hybridized, and something new that Storm couldn't quite focus on before it was all swept away in the next spasm of the time disruption. Krakoa's bays and Akaro's coral swirled into new configurations. Krakoa's quarry and the circle perilous of Akaro blended into each other before finally breaking free. But now the quarry contained Akaran combatants and the circle perilous bewildered mutants of Krakoa. The forests of both islands overgrew each other and separated again, each featuring new species and unknown hybrids. The harder the wind blew, the faster the transformations, and now Storm saw tiny silvers of some new material appearing in the Tempest, sleeting down to the island's surface and shores. The particles stung when they hit her skin, a pain that wasn't entirely physical. It was as if they were injuring her ability to locate herself in space and time. She reeled momentarily, then got her bearings again. The particles rained down over the islands, driving both into a frenzy. Akaro and Krakoa briefly fought each other, bitter as only siblings can be. Storm, standing on the soil with one foot in each world, knew she would be subsumed and destroyed if she did not do something. And as deformed time tore through her being again, rippling her mind the way wind would ripple her hair, she realized what she could do. This was a storm across all of time. And if it was a storm, she could control it. Storm's power over weather was instinctive and had been since she was a girl. This was new and would not be guided by instinct, but by her conscious mind, which was under constant distraction by the onslaught of particles. They ruined her concentration and kept her from grounding herself in here. And now, which was necessary if she was to bring her powers to bear on this tumult. And she was not the only one suffering from the particles. The islands, brutally crushed into each other's reality, wailed in pain and fear, both a sound like a hurricane wind and a psychic scream that rang in Storm's mind. This spurred her into action. She may have been the regent of Akaro, but she still had responsibilities to Krakoa as well. The time storm was forcing them together, and also twisting a new reality into being around them. Storm felt those currents of power, realized that they moved in a system, and for a moment understood that system. Her mutant powers responded, the way electrical charges crackled about her body when she controlled lightning. Now space-time itself rippled around her body, creating glimpses of a million different Aurora Monroes from a million different realities, but none of them could disrupt or displace her. She found herself in control, and she began to quiet the storm. Its boundaries, she knew, extended far beyond her ability to control it, but she had influence over this one small part, and that she intended to use. Krakoa and Akaro were at stake, and with them, the lives of thousands of mutants who would otherwise be adrift on the time stream. She could not let the time storm merge the two islands together. The islands both feared for their survival, and they began to tear at one another physically, with greater intensity as their fear created a feedback loop. Only Storm could stop this madness. She began to guide the currents of the storm, shunting away the most damaging gust and finding smoother paths for both Krakoa and Akaro to move through time? Was she guiding them through time? The way a skilled ship's captain brought a vessel through a storm to safer harbors? If so, where would they both arrive? Gradually, slowly, she channeled the powers of the time storm around the two living islands, letting them redivide into their own entities, drifting further and further apart. Heavier fronts of the stinging particles blew through, and now they were larger, merging into crystals. They precipitated through the storm the way rain precipitated through clouds too heavy with moisture. Who had caused this time storm? How were different realities becoming entangled and overlaid on each other? These were questions for another time. Now she had to make sure the storm was passing, and not just gathering itself for another onslaught. She felt its energy dwindle, even as the crystals fell in greater numbers all around her, all across the island's surface. And as she had that thought, she looked around and realized that the chronal outburst had subsided. Krakoa and Akaro had nearly become one, in a collapse that could have destroyed them both, and doubtless would have annihilated many of the lives on each other. The aftershocks and echoes of their psychic battle still churned in the air around her. But like the time storm, that battle was almost over. Storm stood on the coastline of Krakoa, gazing out at the ocean and... Wait. When the time storm had begun, Storm had been on Mars, on Akaro. Now, as reality settled back into place, she saw that she was on Krakoa, at the edge of the Hellfire Bay, where the White Palace and Blackstone stared each other down from opposing promontories. The air smelled new, sharp with life, and the scent of a just-passed storm. But it was definitely Earth air. Aurora looked around her, over beautiful living Krakoa, and despite her jarring dislocation, she felt an almost maternal pride at the way she had brought it through the crisis. But how had it happened? And now that it was over, how had Storm been transported millions of miles without ever passing through a Krakoan gateway? Had Akaro been safely returned to its home on Mars? Was this even the same timeline that the Living Islands had occupied before the time storm? It had been more powerful than anything she had ever felt. Maybe more powerful than her brief contact with the Phoenix Force. Who had caused it, and how? More importantly, why? What damage had been done to the mutants living on both islands? How could she ensure that this did not happen again? These were a leader's questions. More personally, Storm was anxious to know that her friends and loved ones were all right. She would have to seek them out, both on Krakoa and Akaro, to make sure that they had weathered the time storm. And what of the broader world? What was the situation in New York or Wakanda? Would she find the same New York or the same Wakanda that she had once known? All around her, the crystals precipitated from the storm laid thick on the ground. Storm bent and gathered several of them in her hand, like a mineral made of time, she thought. Xavier needed to hear about this immediately. Magneto as well, although Storm decided on the spot that Xavier should know first. Both old adversaries believed themselves to have mutants' best interest in mind, but Storm's vision aligned more closely with Xavier's. Where was he? Here on Krakoa or elsewhere in this world? Was it a new world? A new time? Or had she misunderstood the nature of the storm? Storm saw people emerging from the forest of Krakoa. Some of them she recognized. Some were new to her. They saw her, high on the ridge overlooking the ocean, and they looked to her for guidance. No matter where they hailed from, Krakoa or Akaro, Earth or Mars, the past, present, or future, she knew one thing. She would not let them down. It was a pretty interesting story. The fact that not once, it never really it was all nothing but narration. While it did briefly tampered with Storm's thoughts, Storm didn't really speak once in any way or form. And that's an interesting way to do a story, is just having it all told of what's going on, but the character does not speak in any way or form. Although their thoughts may still be, narrated, but still. Hang on, let me get a quick drink. Okay, that's better. Roman with the Akanti. Can't wait to see how this one will be. Anyway, that will do for this episode of Marvel Rivals. We're almost there, is all I can say. Join me next time as we read the Punisher's lore story. That is it, and I will see you guys next time.